Sidra's gaze went wild as it fixed on her father-in-law's imposing frame. Even at 60, he seemed untouched by time. His wheat-toned skin was taut and smooth, his eyes bright and unlined, his posture unbowed, not a single crease marred his face. And in Sidra's heart, a bitter question hammered like a sledge. How and why was he still so strong, so youthful, so altogether invincible? Her own husband, Shafiq, had withered away like an old tree long before his time, then passed away in silence. Her uncle Farid, too, had collapsed helplessly in grief when his only son died. But this man, her father-in-law, strode through the house as if time itself obeyed his command. A venom of resentment coursed through Sidra's veins. She carried 1,000 unspoken grievances within her. If only the truth had been revealed sooner, perhaps Shafiq would still be alive. Each evening, Sidra watched him escort himself behind the heavy door of the corner room in their courtyard. From that locked chamber drifted faint wisps of smoke and a strange, intoxicating scent. Something neither soap nor spice. What secret lay hidden there? What mystical power kept him forever young? Her curiosity and her hatred alike flared into a storm inside her. If only I could know, she thought, and expose that blasted secret to the world. But she understood too well. Some battles demanded cunning rather than brute force. Alone by her window, Sidra had witnessed the same routine for weeks, her father-in-law entering the room at dusk, securing the bolt from within, a soft glow seeping beneath the jamb, shadows dancing on its edges, and in moments a swirl of pale smoke drifting skyward before he emerged, refreshed, vibrant, unstoppable. That night, under a moon half hidden behind swift clouds, Sidra rose silently from her bed. Light as a whisper, she crept across the courtyard floor, each step measured and deliberate. The courtyard's cool air brushed her skin, but within her burned a fierce flame. At the door, she paused. A sliver of light broke through the crack. Sidra pressed her ear to the wood. Muffled clinks of clay pots mingled with low, rhythmic murmurs, perhaps an incantation, perhaps prayer. And then, carried on the air, that elusive scent, earthy, pungent, almost mystical. It filled her nostrils with the promise of something ancient and forbidden. Her pulse thundered. She wanted to smash the door down, fling it open, and drag the secret into the light. Yet she forced herself to retreat, to wait, to plan. For if she rushed in now, the truth might slip away. With trembling resolve, she pressed her back against a stone pillar and made a vow. Tonight, she would unearth his mystery, no matter what the cost. She would risk everything, even her own safety, to bring that hidden power into the open. Sidra did not know then that the path she was choosing did not end at a single secret. It would lead her straight to another heart, another bond, another unspoken love, and the first price she would pay was her innocence. Night was drawing to a close. A faint glow of moonlight seeped into the courtyard where Sidra stood, heart pounding. She peered once more through the sliver beneath the heavy door of the corner room. Her father-in-law was locked inside again, and pale smoke drifted out in lazy spirals. Sidra felt her patience snap like a frayed rope. "Enough," she whispered, her voice as cold as the night air. "Tonight, I will learn the truth." She pressed her eye to the crack under the door and beheld a sight that stunned her. A clay pot simmering atop a tiny hearth, filled with a golden brown brew. Her father-in-law was stirring it with care, dropping handfuls of wheat kernels into the bubbling liquid. Interspersed among the grains were odd red and green leaves, herbs she had never seen before. So this was the secret, the magic of wheat. Sidra's breath caught in her throat. At last, her entire purpose was clear, but what would she do next? How would she use this knowledge to her advantage? A silent, vengeful smile curved her lips. The game had entered its final stage, and she was determined to win at any cost. Swiftly and silently, Sidra slipped back through the shadows of the courtyard. Though the moon rode high, its pale light did not deter her resolve. She knew that brute force would fail. She must strike with cunning. By dawn's first light, her plan would be laid, perfect in its intricacy. Morning arrived in a hush, as inconspicuous as any other. Sidra, however, carried within her a fierce exhilaration. When her father-in-law strolled past her under the archway, she arranged her headscarf with gentle precision, lowering her eyes demurely. In that instant, she exuded an innocence so disarming it made him break his stride. Internally, she thought, now nothing can stop you from falling. He regarded her with a glint of desire and self-assurance that Sidra recognized as his greatest weakness. Pride, he would learn, could become his undoing. That evening, she seized her moment. As the lanterns cast dancing shadows in the courtyard, Sidra approached him. "Abaji," she said softly, "I have a humble request if you would not be offended." Her voice trembled just enough to sound sincere. Her father-in-law sat up straighter, as if a bashful youth summoned by a maiden. Sidra continued, her tone edged with faux anxiety. "I worry that people might spread nasty rumors about our household. God forbid, about me. Would it be possible to have the village imam come to our home to bless our family and ward off any slander?" Tears glistened in her eyes, tears of woolly innocence, so artful that no one could doubt their authenticity. Her father-in-law's face broke into a triumphant smile. He rose as though crowned king of all desires. "My daughter," he declared, "nothing is more precious than your honor. Leave it to me. I will visit the imam first thing tomorrow." He was positively beaming. Sidra curtsied, her movements so charming, so filled with filial devotion that he felt as though he possessed the world's most gracious child. "Abaji," she added sweetly, "to celebrate your kindness, I shall prepare a special brew for you, my very own recipe." His eyes gleamed with greed and anticipation. This was the very concoction he had spent years perfecting, and now he would drink it from his daughter-in-law's gifted hands. In his delight, he forgot the old warning, it is pride that first invites ruin. The next morning, Sidra rose before dawn. In the dim glow of the kitchen lamp, she reverently gathered her ingredients: wheat kernels, aromatic spices, and a vial of that strange, potent tincture she had borrowed from her mother's trunk. She worked with care, stirring the mixture and whispering a silent prayer, all the while adding a single, crucial dose of her mother's secret agent, an herb known to sap inner vigor while masking outward signs of weakness. By the time the sun's first rays gilded the courtyard, Sidra had transferred the final brew into a porcelain cup. She murmured Bismillah, in the name of God, and placed the cup upon a silver tray. With measured steps, she carried it across the courtyard to the corner room. She offered it with demure respect. Her father-in-law accepted, sipping greedily. When the first warm mouthful touched his lips, he closed his eyes in satisfaction. Sidra watched his expression intently. Already, faint beads of sweat formed on his brow. Her lips curved into a barely perceptible smile, an expression too sweet, too innocent to betray the venom within. "Delicious," he praised, draining the cup. "Truly, your skill surpasses my own." "Your happiness is my joy, Abaji," Sidra replied, voice drenched in filial warmth. Behind her composed exterior, Sidra's soul reveled in the knowledge. He would never again brandish his youth and power before her. His pride, once his fortress, would crumble from within. By evening, she noted the change. He lingered in the courtyard, head bowed, eyelids heavy. A restlessness seized him, an unspoken agony beneath his dignified exterior. Sidra observed without mercy. This was the fruit of her craft. When night settled once more, Sidra crept beside the sealed door. Inside lay her father-in-law, semi-conscious, muttering softly. She closed the door gently, her heart racing, not with sympathy but with triumph. The war was won. Yet the sweetest victory remained ahead, confronting the mastermind of her own destiny with the secret she had extracted. The courtyard lay bathed in moonlight, its silent stones bearing witness to her triumph. Sidra looked upward, eyes bright with purpose. "No secret will remain hidden," she vowed under her breath, "and pride will always fall before a humbled heart." With that, she slipped away into the night, her resolve as unbreakable as the hero of her own story. The final chapter had begun, and Sidra would see it through to its end. The man who, until yesterday, had carried himself with the pride of a conqueror, now lay half-conscious on the floor. His skin was sallow, deep circles rimmed his eyes, and his lips were parched. Every trace of the vigor that once defined him had vanished. Sidra stepped back into the shadows, pressing her back against the cool, rough wall. She drew in a slow, steadying breath. This sight, her father-in-law brought low, was the first reward of her long, silent toil. Yet she knew she had only scratched the surface. What she needed now was proof, irrefutable evidence that the secret she had long suspected was indeed the ugly truth. Late that afternoon, her father-in-law emerged from the locked room, still unsteady on his feet. He leaned against the doorframe, his face pale but his pride, remnant unbowed. Seizing her chance, Sidra adjusted her dupatta and slipped silently into the forbidden chamber, leaving the door gently ajar behind her. As always, the room exhaled that peculiar, faintly sweet aroma, like an ancient incense burned just too long. Inside, the hearth's embers lay cold. Only wisps of gray smoke still clung to the air above the dark piles of ashes. Scattered across the floor were spilled wheat kernels, a few half-burned fragments of the straw that had once thickly cushioned the hearth. In the corner sat the old clay pot, still warm, its lid ajar. Sidra approached it with a steady heart. She lifted the lid and found a thick sliver of golden residue clinging to the inner walls, the brew that had offered her father-in-law an illusion of eternal youth. Trembling, she dipped a fingertip into the viscous liquid and tasted it. A familiar flavor bloomed on her tongue, the nutty sweetness of wheat, warmed by a whisper of cinnamon, and beneath it, the elusive trace of a herb so rare she had never smelled it in the marketplace. Instantaneously, her mind whirled back to the nights she had insisted on making coffee for her husband Shafiq, only to be sternly forbidden by her father-in-law. At the time, she had thought it superstition. Now the reason was clear. This was the very potion he had used to deceive time itself, hoarding vitality while her own husband wasted away. Shafiq, who had grown up under the oppressive shadow of his ailing father, had died never knowing that the man he called father had preserved his own strength at the cost of his son's life. Her heart clenched at the betrayal. Side by side, she pictured Shafiq's frail frame and her father-in-law's arrogant chest, and her eyes filled with tears of righteous fury. But these tears would no longer signify weakness. They would fuel the fire of her vengeance. Sidra's gaze roamed the room. An old wooden chest stood against one wall. She flung it open and withdrew several yellowed pages, margins scrawled with Arabic and Persian recipes for strengthening tonics. Each formula was a blueprint for magic and deceit. Beneath them all lay a single scrap of paper, its ink faded. Youth is not the body, it is the life within the blood. A cold dread gripped her. Her father-in-law had deliberately sacrificed Shafiq, his own son, to secure the vigor that had kept him powerful for decades. Sidra shivered at the enormity of his crime. This chamber was not merely a secret laboratory. It was a crime scene. Her resolve crystallized. She would expose him fully, shatter his pride forever. Yet she understood that simply revealing the potion would not suffice. She needed to make him experience his downfall from within, to feel the death of his arrogance in the very marrow of his bones. Moving silently, she replaced everything as she found it, the brew, the scattered wheat, the papers, so that no one would suspect her midnight intrusion. Retreating to the shadowed corner of the courtyard, she leaned against the cold stone and mapped the final strike. She would weaponize his own brew against him. That evening, as the courtyard lamps were lit, she watched him step out for his customary stroll. He looked older already, lines deeper in his face, the confident swing of his shoulders slack. Sidra took a moment to compose herself before she approached. Tonight, she would deploy the last lethal dose. Sidra had taken extra care with her appearance. Her sari was draped with effortless grace. The softest jasmine oil dusted her hair, and a single glass bead glinted at her wrist when she smiled at him and greeted him with warm concern. "Abaji, you seem weary tonight." He felt his heart loosen for her once more. He confessed, voice hushed, "I am old, my child. Time's toll is heavy." Sidra stepped closer, lowering her gaze in feigned empathy. "If you wish to unburden your mind, I would gladly listen," she offered. Her voice was an irresistibly gentle soap, lulling him into a childlike trust. He settled onto the low stone bench and confided in her, unaware that each word hastened his undoing. "Sometimes I regret not placing my trust in others more," he admitted. "If only I had been wiser with my own strength." Sidra glanced at the watch on her wrist. Perfect. Tonight's brew would promise solace. and deliver collapse. Excusing herself briefly, she returned clutching a steaming clay cup. "For you," she said softly. "My special blend to lift your spirit." He accepted it eagerly, inhaling its smoky sweetness and drinking deeply. Cedra watched with clinical calm as a faint sheen of sweat appeared on his brow, his grip on the cup slackened, and his eyelids fluttered. Sunlight was already creeping across the courtyard when her father-in-law finally slumped in a heap. His eyes opened once more, glazed and unfocused. Cedra knelt beside him, her face serene. The ancient courtyard, heavy with jasmine and damp stone, bore witness to his proud defeat. She brushed a lock of hair behind her ear, her expression soft but her heart steeled. The final stroke had been struck. Yet as the first morning doves cooed at dawn, Cedra knew her journey was not yet complete. Vengeance had a second price. She would need to stand before the world and reveal the truth. Her tears at that moment, wrought with sorrow for her husband's death, would be her shield. But in her core, a darker satisfaction bloomed. The Tower of Pride had been demolished, and now only the fragile shell remained. And one day soon, this broken man would confess his crimes, forever shamed by the truth. Cedra rose, her silhouette slender against the breaking dawn. She stepped back into the corridors of the home that had once been prison and sanctuary alike. Now, armed with proof and purpose, she would confront her father-in-law with the evidence, exposing him to the world he once commanded. No secret would linger any longer. And when that final reckoning came, Cedra would stand victorious, not a weak wife avenging her husband, but a woman who wielded intellect and courage to bring ruin to a tyrant's empire. And in that moment, the only strength that would endure would be the strength of her truth. He had already resolved in his heart that come morning, he would seek out the village imam and formalize the marriage contract. He had forgotten the old lesson. The man who crowns himself king of youth will sooner or later receive the slap of fate. When Cedra observed her father-in-law, now ready to offer his honor and affection so openly, she knew the moment for her final strike had arrived. It was not enough merely to expose his secret. She would shatter his spirit so completely that he could never raise his head again. Today, he would call upon the imam, presenting himself in his mind as the gallant savior of his widowed daughter-in-law. As Cedra prepared, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The fine lines around her eyes seemed slightly deeper, and the fading shadows beneath them whispered of long nights and sleepless plotting. But, she reassured herself, it was only a few days' indisposition. After one last cup of his magical brew, he would appear as hale and robust as ever. With that thought, she donned an old flowing dress and picked up her walking stick. Quietly, he left the house just before dawn. In the stillness, every footstep seemed charged with destiny. The door clicked softly behind him, and Cedra stood perfectly still, letting the excitement settle around her like sweet incense. Inside the dimly lit room, the familiar scents greeted her: wheat, ghostly embers of wood ash, and that persistent undercurrent of long-harbored vitality. The small hearth still glowed faintly with heat, and the cracked clay pot bore the unmistakable marks of last night's brew. Scattered kernels of wheat lay across the floor, and in the corner, an empty bowl, its golden residue telling the tale of its strength. Cedra lifted the bowl, scooped a tiny drop to her lips, and tasted the grainy sweetness laced with cinnamon and an almost imperceptible bitterness. A faint, triumphant smile touched her face. The lock to the secret chamber had been forced. There was no turning back. She replaced the bowl, swept a hand through the stray wheat, and slipped out just as silently. Back in the courtyard, she bent to gather her final ingredient, a shrouded vial of a potent elixir from her own mother's hidden stores, a poison so insidious it would not kill outright, but sap the life from within, leaving only the shell of strength he so prized. All evidence of her late-night intrusion was erased. The clay pot was wiped clean, the embers carefully stirred out, and the door closed with the same discreet click as before. She crossed back to the house, every nerve alight with anticipation. Moments later, her father-in-law returned, crestfallen, yet still determined. "My daughter," he said, masking his unease with a courteous nod. "If you would be so kind, a cup of coffee. My nerves are unsettled." Sidra inclined her head, all innocent grace. Of course, Abaji. In mere minutes, she presented him with a steaming cup upon a silver tray. The aroma curled in the air, a familiar, comforting blend. Yet only she knew the lethal twist woven into its depths. She whispered a silent blessing, then watched as he took the cup. He lifted it with reverent fingers, closed his eyes as the warmth spread through him, and drank deeply. Sidra observed the confident arc of his throat descending, the settled ease that always followed his morning ritual. But today was different. The courtyard sun climbed, splintering across the walls. When he set the cup down, wiped his lips, and cleared his throat. Sidra stifled her impatience as she waited for the decree of vitality that never came. Instead, a subtle tremor rocked his hands. He frowned. "Are you all right, Abaji?" she asked in a concerned murmur that hid her triumph. He patted his chest. "I feel odd," he admitted. A bit lightheaded. Every eye in the courtyard might have caught the tremor in his voice, the pallor that seemed to flicker across his features. Sidra's lips curved into a gracious smile. "Perhaps you need rest," she offered, voice gentle as a sigh. He nodded, standing unsteadily. "Yes. Rest sounds wise." She supported his arm as he wobbled toward the veranda bench. With each step, his balance betrayed him further. Cigarette of raw potency, laced with her mother's secret poison, had stolen his strength rather than renewed it. By midday, his proud posture had folded into a slump. His breathing grew labored. Sidra remained at his side, concern painting her expression, while inside her heart beat fierce with vindication. Today, his arrogance had become his downfall. When he finally drifted into a troubled doze, Sidra stood and watched him. The same strong chest that had dominated her life lay still. She gazed at him, no longer immortal, but fragile, mortal, subject to the same decay he once flouted. Yet even then, she understood, revenge alone would leave her empty. She must wield his confession as her true victory. In that wealthy home, she would summon the imam, unveil the secret, and demand justice not only for her husband's death, but for every heart broken by his pride. Tilting her head, Sidra studied his pallid cheeks and sunken eyes, a wild sense of power rippling through her. Tomorrow, she would ensure that every villager knew how the fountain of youth had been a poison well disguised. Tonight, though, she allowed herself a single private triumph. Her long secret was avenged. As the courtyard's breeze stirred the jasmine vines, she turned and walked away. Under the glaring noon sun, dust motes glittered like stars fallen to earth, as though the world itself celebrated his fall. Before Sidra retired to plan the final unveiling, she cast one last look back at the weakened figure resting on the bench and whispered, "Now your kingdom truly lies in ruins." His shoulders had bowed, his face had grown ashen, and an unfamiliar weariness swam behind his eyes. He was no longer the man Sidra had harbored silent rage against for years. Without a sound, Sidra adjusted her shawl and slipped toward the kitchen. She knew everything had changed today. Her father-in-law possessed no strength now, no pride, no stolen youth, nothing of the arrogance that had poisoned Sidra's life for so long. Today he was merely a helpless, infirm old man, crushed beneath the weight of his own sins. Sidra's steps toward the kitchen were lighter than ever. There was no fear left in her heart, no tremor of anxiety. She began preparing breakfast as usual, but every sight, every scent seemed bathed in new light. The steaming rice's soft fragrance, the faint patter of rain outside, the distant chirp of birds heralding dawn. Everything felt transformed. Her father-in-law stumbled in, each step uncertain. Sidra glanced up at him, expression neutral, then returned to her cooking. He cleared his throat, striving to draw her attention, but she remained deliberately absorbed in her work. She understood now that the power dynamic had shifted. He would be the one to speak, to plead, to bow. "Sidra, my child," he said in a fatigued voice that once would have commanded any room. For the first time, she heard a tremor in his words that had never been there before. She paused only long enough to study him, then resumed her task with calm efficiency. Inside, a cold smile danced on her lips. Moments later, he sank into an old wooden chair, his hands shaking, his gaze fixed on the floor. The man who had once looked down on everyone from a lofty pedestal now sat broken, licking the dust of his own defeat. Sidra set a plate of steaming breakfast before him, still without a word. "Sidra," he managed after a long exhale. "I spoke to the imam yesterday." His voice faltered. "But he was ill, couldn't come to the mosque." "I'll go again." Sidra raised her eyes to his, silent for a heartbeat. Was this really the same proud tyrant who had strutted through her life? Then, with soft finality, she said, "There is no longer any need, Abaji. Let everything rest in the hands of time." Her tone bore no triumph, only a chill truth. He lowered his gaze, finally feeling the full weight of his powerlessness. Sidra watched him swallow hard, realizing he was truly buried beneath the rubble of his own arrogance. The very man who had once mocked her helplessness now pleaded for mercy. After that day, Sidra never again treated him harshly. She spoke no rebuke, offered no biting remark. She understood that the greatest revenge is silence. She simply carried on with her routine, fulfilling her duties quietly. Beneath it all, she carried a deep tranquility, a peace born only when truth emerges at last. Within days, Sidra noticed her father-in-law's transformation. He moved more slowly, spoke less often. He spent hours seated in a quiet corner, gazing out the window or staring at the ceiling. The light that had once danced in his eyes had dimmed to a pale ember. One evening, Sidra began preparing to return to her parental home. She decided she no longer belonged here. There was no love left, no bond worth holding on to. Her husband was gone, the trust upon which she had built her life had been betrayed. Only silent graves and unfulfilled dreams remained. Gathering her few belongings, some clothes, a stack of books, Shafiq's old watch, she packed a small bag. As she stepped into the courtyard for the last time, her father-in-law stood by the gate, frail and bowed. He lifted his eyes as if to speak, but no words came. Sidra offered a gentle nod, a silent farewell, and walked away. The rain had stopped. The earth gave off a faint, damp scent. Vapor rose from the ground, as though nature itself was pausing to witness this quiet ending. Sidra paused at the corner of the lane, glancing back at the house one final time. She inhaled deeply, then turned toward her new life, where there would be no betrayal, no more lies. Behind her, the man she left behind lay buried in regret and guilt. Sidra walked on, each step carrying her closer to the freedom she had long yearned for, leaving him alone to bear the consequences of his own making. When the final news came from the village that his estate had been divided among distant relatives, Sidra closed the door with a quiet smile. There was no longer any tie binding her to that house or to the past that had buried her dreams. Days stretched into months, months into years. In the silence that followed, Sidra rebuilt her life with calm determination. She set up a modest little business and worked diligently, finding satisfaction in honest labor. On moonlit nights, she would take out Shafiq's photograph, gaze at his smiling face, and whisper softly, "Look, my love, I have taken your revenge. I have balanced the scales for your helplessness." And the silver nights bore witness to her prayers. Sidra never let pride swell in her heart at her own strength. She understood that when one entrusts one's cause to God, justice descends on its own. She transformed her bitterness into quiet resolve, shaping her vengeance into patience. And instead of burning herself in the flames of retaliation, she used her ashes to forge a new life. Her story had not ended. Instead, a new chapter had begun, a chapter without deceit or betrayal, guided only by truth, endurance, prayer, and dignity. And that path, she knew, led straight to the paradise where loyal souls like Shafiq rest at last. One day, Sidra herself would set out for that destination, her face uplifted in joy, her heart warm with faith, carrying the light of truth wherever she went.